COVID-19 shots and the state of vaccine mandates bringing renewed attention to public health. The FDA has rolled out new restrictions on who can get the latest COVID vaccine. And in Florida, state lawmakers are pushing to scrap all vaccine mandates there. So for more on the shifts in vaccine policy, we turn now to Chief Medical Officer at HERS, gynecologist and women's health expert, Dr. Jessica Shepard. Dr. Shepard, thanks for being with us. Let's start with where things stand right now. Can anyone who wants the COVID vaccine get one?
Yes, currently where we are is everyone can still get the vaccine as we've seen before. Now, where we do see that confusion, as you mentioned, Janae, is states. So looking at Florida, who has limited mandates on vaccines, but also these new federal restrictions on who can get the COVID-19 vaccinations. Now, that's where confusion can start, especially since most pharmacies are 95% of people get their vaccinations from a pharmacy. And when we look at health insurance and coverage, most of those are going to be covered by some form of insurance. So this is where we can see a lot of confusion in who can get it, what's covered, and where you can get it.
So let's talk about Florida, where lawmakers are pushing to eliminate all vaccine mandates. What could this look like in the short term and even the long term?
You know, I think it's actually more important to look at long term, because short term, a lot of that can be built up with emotions and who's in leadership, and really looking at data and looking at evidence-based medicine. Now, long term is where we do have the conundrum, because that's where we look into herd immunity, and that's where we look at populations. And literally, this is a public health issue. So there's a lot of individual, I guess you can say, opinions and who is going to say what. But when you look at the population, there are a lot of different diseases that we have been able either to eradicate or significantly decrease the chances of getting those diseases. And that's how we look at it as a population in the community. And that's why vaccines really are so important, because they allow people who maybe don't have access to vaccines or maybe have decreased immunity and can't get vaccines, the decreased ability of getting these diseases. So really looking at it from a broad perspective of community rather than individual. And I think leadership is where we do need to see these kind of charges in looking out for everybody, not just individuals.
Yeah, important reminders there. So Dr. Shepard, one of the top Google trends this week relating to vaccines was autism, but the science, that has remained the same despite political claims, right?
That really has stayed the same. There has been no difference in this correlation between what causes it and what is a direct cause of these neurobiological issues. And I think this can be one of those emotional standing points where someone may make a claim, but really, what is the science behind it? And that's what is lacking in what we see in leadership, specifically with the CDC and who is the head of the HHS. So what we've seen in the past is there have been some literature that may show some increased risk of that, but that's where we have to rely on data and the experts who know how to extrapolate those data points for the community who may not know how to understand the literature. And what we have seen is there is no strong correlation between the two, and that's what we really have to focus on, is where is the strong data and what that means for everyone who may have a decision in how they would like to proceed later.
So another trending question, how many vaccines are required for children, and do infants need vaccines? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'll start with the infants. And the reason why we focus on giving infants vaccines is because their immune system does not have the capability of fending against some of the diseases that they might be in contact with from adults. And a lot of this can go without having a symptom, right? So you have a lot of asymptomatic diseases that can be in the environment or someone who's holding an infant, and therefore the infant has exposure. So the vaccine, again, is going to decrease that infant from getting that disease. So that's why we focus on those ages, namely when we think of the vaccinations, and basically from birth all the way from 6 months and even going into 5 years old. So that's why it's important. And that's why when we look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, 6 through 23 months are the highest risk for some of these diseases, and that's why we need to protect those infants.
That is a very important reminder, as I've got a little one at home that's about 22 months. And lastly, Dr. Shepard, one of the trending Google searches related to vaccines, what would happen without vaccinations?
Oh, this is really very important, going back to when we were talking about herd immunity. So, again, at the end of the day, everyone has a decision or an option to decide if they like vaccines or want vaccines. But the more important part of it is the education behind it. And I think that's where we're lacking right now, is instead of looking at emotions, looking at the education behind the diseases behind people who are not immune. And if we eliminate vaccines, that we're going to actually see it more in the community. And then you're going to increase the chances of having these diseases again, which many of them we've been able to eradicate, meaning completely take it out of the vocabulary of having a disease. So I think that when we look at overall where we were in the past before vaccines, I mean, if you really want to go historically and look at that, that data is very shocking. And I really would not want to go back to that, especially when we have the science and data that proves that vaccine is going to decrease that type of outbreak.
And having these discussions is top of mind for so many Americans, as we can see by these trending Google searches. Dr. Jessica Shepard, thank you for being with us to sort through it, especially with that perfect sweater for U.S. Open finals this weekend. We appreciate you.